there are questions you would like to raise from the previous session, but also based on um, after reading the content of Module 1. Maybe we can start there. And meanwhile, also we had this housekeeping update, but probably this is an information for everyone, so we can wait to use that information. Any questions so far? We could go from there. Did you get a chance to read and do some of the practice activities in the syllabus?
Well, I didn't have the chance to do this. I read the document on Monday evening when you sent it, but I didn't do the practice. And I think it will be crazy to do 2 sessions per week, literally.
Okay.
One session would be great because we will have the weekend to prepare, to read, to answer all the questions, to do the quizzes, and so on. Um, at least for me, يعني,
Okay.
it's really hard. Our work is hard, and especially now we're revising our curriculum, so it's crazy at third. And then we have our children at home.
We
We
know,
need
we totally
to
understand. The
take care
online
of
learning
them
is
a
not.
little bit,
Mm,
little, tiny bit.
mm.
So that's why it's really
So
hard to
one
be able to
session will
work
be, yeah.
during the, yeah, for me. So this is my opinion.
We take note, and actually we are waiting for the majority of participants to respond to the survey, where we asked several questions, including the one you just mentioned, the possibility of having one session either on Monday or Tuesday, one session per week, and then let you do the activities and then come back to us individually or as a group if you have then specific needs to discuss, but it will not be a call to everyone to attend. It will just be really the coaching sessions upon demand. Probably we can use that modality starting next week, but we will wait maybe until tomorrow to receive more responses because we haven't the response rate so far is really low. There is Yvonne on the chat who says that totally agrees. Probably you're not the only one. So I'm asking myself what to do because you are only 4. Should we do the session or yeah, we can do it and record it for other participants to view after. Actually, we should Sage, we should also see whether participants are watching the recorded sessions afterward, maybe. That
Claude, more
yes.
colleagues joined, so we have now more than 4, I think.
Okay, okay. I cannot see the whole screen, so that's okay. So let's start then. We will really have to adjust this. If you could really let your colleagues know that there is the survey to fill, so that we have more information to take decision, whether we do 2 sessions or 1 session, etc. But the demand seems to be pointing to 1 session per week. We had booked 2 hours. Maybe we keep 2 hours, but if we want to do more, we are really flexible for that. I will let Sage maybe remind quickly these new updated logistical aspects before we continue with the content.
Thanks, Claude, and hello, everyone. I'm just going to quickly paste something in the chat. So I just have a couple of quick things to go over. And just first, I'll kind of second the idea, Claude, that we'll go ahead with the session and put the recording online and just check to see to see if people are able to view the recording. So I've just posted in the chat 3 links. So we have first the availability survey. If you haven't already been able to fill out your availability, just let us know and we'll hopefully find a good time for everybody to meet. And then the next 2 links, and perhaps Claude, you could go to the next slide for just a moment. The next 2 links are the new WhatsApp groups that you're welcome to join. So we have one for everybody, all participants, and then one for just the group coordinators. So go ahead if you would like to join the participants WhatsApp, and then if you are a group coordinator, you're welcome also to join the group coordinator WhatsApp. And don't worry if you haven't yet decided on a group coordinator, we'll touch base on that again next week, and we'll have these links available as well. So you are welcome to use the QR code on the screen or the links that are in the chat. And again, if you haven't taken the survey, we'd love it if you could take the survey just to let us know your availability, though I think probably most of you have already taken the survey. So I'll just maybe steal the screen share from Claude. I'll just take that and we'll put the WhatsApp QR codes back up next week as well, but if anything, the link is in the chat as well. I'll just share my screen. I'm quickly going to oh, wonderful. I see Graziella, you've already entered the WhatsApp group. Welcome. So I just wanted to, I can't remember who asked the question, if it was you, Rania, but someone asked how they could change their profile, and I just mentioned that it's possible that there was a change in the past couple of weeks because we've started this new My IEP system. So that was indeed true. So I got new instructions from our IT team about how to update your profile because previously it was grayed out where you could change your gender. So to everyone who would like to update their profile, potentially add a profile picture, you can update your language as well. There's a new link under the personal information section under the introduction page. And that just takes you to your My IAP account. So you just click the link, and if you're logged in, it will automatically send you to your My IAP account logged in. So you should be able to, oops, I just have to minimize this. Go to your profile here on your My IAP account, and then
Thank
you
you
will
so
have
much for that. I changed, so I edited my profile. Thank you.
Oh,
It
perfect.
wasn't my profile, it was some details that I couldn't access. So thank you
Oh,
so much for your response.
oh, wonderful. Okay, I'm so glad it worked. Perfect. All right. Thank you, Graciela. And so, yeah, anyone else who would like to change, potentially notably their language as well, if you're more comfortable in French, you may want the website in French. We don't have Arabic yet as a language preference, unfortunately, but English and French are here as well. So I'll just save that. And then again, you can find this on the introduction page. Oops, just going back to show that. Under the introduction section, under edit my profile. Wonderful. So I'll just I'll stop my screen share there, and if anybody has any questions about the platform, I'll be in the chat as well. You're welcome to mention them now. But otherwise, I'll send back to you, Claude. Thank you, everyone.
Hey, thank you so much, Sage. We're going to continue with module 1, where we left off last time. And really, we would like to ask you to ask questions and really interact with us as we move forward. We've also noted some of the some of the questions you posted. On the platform, and at least for me, what I learned from that is that there is a demand to have a very practical training, which is expected, and very practical, meaning that something that will be useful for you on your daily activities. So we not that we knew that already, but we'll make sure to respond to that demand even more. Another demand also related to that is to have a stronger focus on the budgeting, preparation of budgets, and the implementation of budgets. And also a last demand to maybe it was not a demand as such, but someone saying that there is a number of prerequisites in terms of the education economics and other PFM terminologies to be able to work with the course. All of it is true, but what I would like to say is that module 1, as we said last time, maybe I can go back to that. Sorry, going back. The module 1 and 2 are really introductory modules, meaning that we know that participants come from different backgrounds in terms of their trainings, but also in terms of what they do, like their current jobs. And we wanted to make sure that from the outset, there is a common knowledge related to the tools and the terminologies we're going to be using. So this is really the objective module 1 and module 2, meaning that the bulk or the core of the training will really start with module 3, which is going to last 3 weeks, focusing on strategy, planning, and budgeting. This is hopefully something that will respond to your demand, but we are really flexible, adjusting the content as we move forward. And let me see from my notes. And also at the beginning of this session, I'm trying to find her name. It's Nada, sorry, Nada, who made a comment saying that although the course is in English, we welcome really everyone to use the language they prefer. If you want to make a comment in French or English or Arabic, feel free to do so, and then we can see whether our colleagues can help translating. But you should not be constrained by the language, so feel free to use any language, including actually in one you write, we respond to on the platform. So I also wanted to take maybe 5 minutes to see whether you have any questions so far regarding what we've covered in the training before we continue with Unit 2 of Module 1. Is there any question, comments, request for clarification?
No, thank you. All the participants from the RDP, you see.
Yeah. So thank you so much. So I'll continue with section 2, and that section 2 is going to be addressing some of the comments received. I think there is at least 2 participants who mentioned that they would like to learn more about how to raise more resources for education in Lebanon. So by understanding what are the different sources of education finance, and then what are the possibilities of tapping into these sources is a good way also to raise funding. So Unit 2 is really about understanding the overall architecture of education finance, of course, starting from a theoretical background or framework, and then we can see then how this applies to Lebanon specifically. Typically, when we want to assess education finance, of course, you start by the public resources. Otherwise, it means the government funding. Government funding can come from two main sources, the internal financing and the external. Internal financing is typically the national budget, or also called domestic resources, comprised of the resources the government manages to collect from taxes and all these revenue collection activities. But also, depending on the context, the government can have other sources of funding. These can be loans and grants, and that's the part related to external financing. External financing comes mostly through loans, loans meaning that the money will have to be reimbursed at some point. And grants is money that is more or less free without an expectation to reimburse, or with very beneficial conditions in terms of reimbursement. Sorry, I covered this already without showing it, but I will stop here to see whether there are questions. But typically, the education financing in a typical setting, this is how it looks like. But of course, it depends on the country context, whether in a typical country you find that public resources is huge majority of education finance with very little external financing, but in some context, depending on many factors, including the level of development of that country, or depending on where the country is in terms of its a relationship with donors, then the donors funding can be more or less a source. And also we know that external finance, of course, is a very unstable source of funding. So government should not be really too much relying on external financing. Of course, happy to interact with you on this. External financing, for instance, for Lebanon is a very important source. As I said, I think we're going to see some statistics on that, but there are countries, including Lebanon, that really depend quite a lot on external financing. And I said that as much as it provides the resources needed, it also creates dependency, particularly when it's money on which you do not have control, where donors can, out of their own decision, decide to stop it or reduce it without really the country having a say on that. Voilà. Before going forward, really, questions and any reaction on this? We will see later how one can compute the rate of external dependency, but it's very straightforward. If I have out of 100 education finance, I know that the government is giving this share, and then the other share is coming from external financing. There is a possibility then of assessing the dependency, which is just a ratio, saying that education financing in Lebanon receives 20, 30, or 40% from donor financing. Then by looking at that indicator over several years, you can assess whether the sector itself or the government can do the calculation at both level is dependent or not dependent. But it's a very relative indicator, because dependency, it's not easy to say that 10% is too much dependency compared to 20 or 25%. One way of assessing that, because it's a relative indicator, is also to compare with the same indicator over time to see whether it's increasing or decreasing. Also to compare it with other countries. In that case, for instance, will be to have in the region how other countries are doing, or more broadly or more globally with countries with similar economic conditions. I cannot see my screen whether there are questions on the chat or not, but this is really when one is assessing the first, it's important to understand the sources of education finance, the government, and then the external. In some countries, families also constitute a significant share of education finance. We will come back to that later. As part of the public expenditure, we just saw, and this is something that is also important for Lebanon, is then out of the public expenditure, how much is going to debt repayment. These also can be an important factor depending on the context, but it was useful to bring this to your attention as part of this training because it is an important topic in Lebanon today, the money that is going into debt repayment. As you know, debt is money that have been used in the past. Hopefully, if it is for good investment, is that it's producing interest or some sort of benefit. But sometimes these loans and private or public loans are not put to good use, but they are repayment are spread out over several decades. And it's really a burden to the society, a burden to, of course, education sector. And it also creates a gap for the current generation when you are paying debt for a money you did not benefit of. This is also a way of seeing that. So I'd like to hear your reactions on this as well. So
Yeah, Claude.
yes,
Yeah,
yes, please.
you're 100% right. So the children of our children will pay the debt we're doing now. And the big problem is that we take new loans to pay the debt. So
Yeah,
we are adding our debt to pay the debt that we have.
yeah.
So this is the biggest problem here in our government.
Yeah, definitely. It's really by looking, we're going to look at a summary of fiscal performance, the data about the budget, revenues and expenditure, and then the deficit. It's of course a very worrying situation. Hopefully, there will be improvement. But when you look at the data, it's difficult when you are borrowing new money just to pay the debt. It means actually that you are not even investing that debt into productive investment. So typically, these are the types of analysis you have to conduct when you are assessing the adequacy, the feasibility, and also understanding what are the challenges the education sector is facing. If you have a government that is using 30 to 40% of its revenue on paying debt, it just simply means that the available resources for education, but not only education. Here we're talking about education, but there is education, there is health, and all the public services that have less and less available resources for them. So it's, of course, direct implications to the daily lives of the population. Before going to details, so along there are three main blocks when we are looking at the public expenditure. So the recurrent, typically the definition is that the expenditure that is needed every month, every year, because here we are really talking on a fiscal year basis. So these are very recurrent expenses like salaries, textbooks, and all of these um, admin fees. And then, of course, there is capital expenditure, which is mostly also called investment. So we're talking about buildings and heavy equipment. So these are the different components, but of course, we'd like to see, but we are quite interested in in all of them, including on the debt servicing, because of the special context Lebanon is in today. I would like to ask questions whether you are familiar with these types of documents. This is one of the financial statement, a public finance statement. There are many, including the budget itself, but it is a good asset to have to be able to read this document and understand its content. I don't know how many of you are. Of course, you indicate that you've worked in the budget preparation at different moments, but sometimes you do your department budget, then it feeds into the sector budget, then it goes to the country's budget. Whether you are familiar with these documents, I'll be interested in learning. But otherwise, would like to take a few minutes also to be able to read what is the content and what does it tell. Feel free to use the mic. All right, I cannot see the screen, but I'm looking for, I think, yeah, we have it here.
Also, you can feel free to use the reactions available in the chat. So maybe a thumbs up if you have seen it or used it before. We have Rania in the chat who says that she's not familiar with the summary of fiscal performance documents. It would be great to hear from everyone, even with reactions. So thumbs up or
good,
thumbs down.
good. So we have a description of these financial statements in the module, so you can have a look later, but we can take like 2 or 3 minutes to see this one. So this document, we took it from the Ministry of Finance, Lebanon Ministry of Finance. So it's an official document website. And it's the most recent document available is for 2021. We would have liked to have a more recent information, but for practice purposes, we can refer to this without any problem. The data you see are in millions of Lebanese pounds, and they are we have monthly data, and then we have a total for that year. For some economic analysis, sometimes it is useful to see month by month analysis because of the economic activity, you do not have the same average every year. So you can see, for instance, from January, it is really low compared to later in the year. And then it also keeps moving up and down. This is really very much related to economic activity or business cycles. But what I want to say here, so in such a document, the fiscal summary of fiscal performance, you have 3 main parts. The first one is the revenues. You have the revenues. Then you have the expenditures, which put together are part of the budget transactions. And then you have another second part, which is the budget transaction, treasury transactions. And then, so these are the main to look to. And then there is this block here, where then you can have all of these macroeconomic indicators assessing the financial health of the country. So that this is where you see the debt and the ratio, debt compared to the GDP and other statistics. Maybe if we use the total so that we can refer at least to a full year, revenues, for instance, for 2021, total revenues for that year were 18 thousands. I'll round up to only the first 2 digits. 18. So that's 18 trillion Lebanese pounds. And then you can see the different compositions of revenues. As I said, the revenues can be comprised of tax revenues. So these are tax revenues, and then non-tax revenues. And then if you have access to the overall report, you can even go down at another level of details. But for us, this is enough. So we can say that revenues in Lebanon are comprised of tax revenues and non-tax revenues. Tax revenues, for instance, out of the 18 trillion in 2018, 15 came from tax, which is a typical architecture, because modern countries today, they are funded by taxes, because few countries run businesses like it used to be in the past. Few countries, they have public companies. They only there is a private sector and maybe semi-public companies, and then countries only charge taxes, and then this is how they fund then the public services. And then of course there are different types of taxes. The most known one is the VAT, la TVA, which in Lebanon represents, sorry, looking at these, is almost 5 trillion. So maybe 25% of the total, but the vast majority is this one, the custom revenues. So these are taxes on imports and exports. And VAT is taxes on internal consumption products the population buys locally. So this is a way of assessing countries' revenue. So, and you can imagine actually when there is a crisis, whether, for instance, let's use COVID, which put a stop on many activities, including trade and movements of people and products. It quickly affected how the government could raise resources on this. So when you are assessing you can look at this data at 1 year, but also you can, for those who are doing planning for the next 2 or 3 years to come, you can also make a hypothesis on how these data or sources of income are going to evolve based on a number of hypotheses, because we know what happens when borders are closed. There is no trade and the government cannot collect revenues. And if a country is relying a lot on custom revenues, it means that if there are issues which affect the economic activity, the government will not be able to collect revenues. So these are typical examples, but of course we can go beyond, and you'll find in the module more information. But really very important asset to have to be able to read this information. And then after the revenues, you have the expenditure. So the budget, as you know, in the reader, budget is 2 types, revenues and expenditures. And for the expenditure side, then you have several also subcomponents, the general expenditures, and the interest payment. That's what we are going to be also focusing on to see what is these for the case of Lebanon. So general expenditures in PFM terminologies, it just means the typical functioning or expenditures of the government. So this is comprised of the salaries, recurrent, but also investment. So generally, it just means that it's yes, we have a glossary we're going to be sharing with you later, which provides definitions.
It's split up into two types of expenditures. We have the regular, and we have the investment or the processing one.
Exactly. So, for instance, for the case of Lebanon in 2021, out of it, a total of expenditure of 15 trillion, 12.9 was for general expenditures, and then interest payment for 2.6. You can already see here that you can compute already indicators assessing how much does or do interest payment represent in the total expenditure. You can, by comparing 2.6 out of the 15, it will give you an idea of the debt repayment. And then for the interest payments, you have domestic debts and then the foreign debts. Very straightforward. Domestic, it means that is the debt the government has on national.
Inside the financial market.
Yes, it could be financial market. It could also
market.
internal. It could be also populations. When the government issue bonds, population also
Yes,
can
bonds.
yes, the treasury. So these are the most. I think you're going to be helping me explain this. Yeah, it looks like you're very familiar with these notions. So very basic statement, and then of course after this you have several in French we call it agrégat macroeconomic, like a summary indicators that will give you an idea of the health, the economic health. One thing you can already see is that for that specific year, revenues were higher than expenses, which is a good thing. It means that the government received more revenues than they spent as expenditures, and there is a positive difference of 3 trillion. And of course, it's only 1 year. So if you want to assess these indicators, you need to look at them over several years to have a clear and overall picture. So from the module, you see that there are, when it's a negative number, it's a deficit. When it's positive, surplus. For this year, there was a surplus of 3 trillion, but it was for specific year. And then after this, of course, I think there is there are these aggregate indicators. If you compare these 3 trillion as part of the total expenditure, it represents 19.4%. Means that 3 trillion compared to the 15. So you can say that the roughly 20%, let's say. And then there is another indicator that is the budget primary deficit in percentage of total expenditure. And 37%.
37.34.
Yes. And then, of course, this is for 1 year. And then you go into another whole section on treasury transactions, which provide many more information. In most cases, it just tells you how the government is going to either use this money. Actually, when it's a surplus, the government intends to use the surplus. When it's deficit, it's how the government intends to finance this deficit. Are they going to be asking for more loans, etc.? So you need to really to be able to see these in these treasury transactions are directly linked to this amount. So if I have a deficit, I need to be able to say how am I going to finance the deficit, because a budget need to be balanced. You cannot have a budget with I mean, expenses need to be equal to expenditures. So if I have more, I need to say what I'm going to be doing with that surplus. If I have a deficit, I need to say how am I going to be finding money to fill that gap. In the treasury transactions are exactly about that. So a question so far. I have a question for you to see whether this has been clear. Let me, I'm learning at the same time how to use the Zoom. What do you think of this line?
Which one? Which line?
Électricité du Liban.
Right. Yeah, we checked that, but why the government will be giving money to Électricité du Liban?
تفضلوا يا زملاء.
Because
خبرون ليش؟
because this institution in our country is in deficit, because in my opinion, because the corruption. You that.
It's possible. I don't have information to back up that, but it is possible. So in countries, so as I said earlier, you remember I said that model governments do not run businesses anymore, but there are some companies that provide public services, and so these are like transport, water, electricity. In some countries, these companies are 100% private. So they charge fees to users
Private
and
sector,
then
yeah.
they sell. But in some countries, these are semi-public companies. And in that case, they might receive government subsidies. In French, it's a subvention publique. But it becomes a problem when a government becomes too reliant on public subsidies. Actually, it means that the company is not viable. It's not making profit, and the government has every year to put in money. Otherwise, it will go bankrupt. So it looks like that's the case because the government seems to be giving a lot of money every year, close to 1 trillion every year. So another way to see this is that because we are considering that this company, what the analysis we are doing applies the same time to all so like a water delivery, transport, etc. They should be able to recover their cost through user fees. So it's another discussion and analysis why and whether ADL is not recovering their cost on users. If they produce electricity and they sell it, they should be recovering. So if they're not doing it, it's another discussion. But what we can see here that the government is giving money to the company because the company do not make a benefit. So they are covering their cost.
Yeah, Claude, we
You
need to
wanted to
add
make a comment?
something here.
Yes.
Yeah, we need to add something that they produce electricity, but we don't have electricity.
Oh,
So we only have 6 to 10 hours per day electricity, and this is the corruption in this ministry.
it's really, of course, you live within this context every day. You are affected. But for us, when we were drafting the content, it was very painful to look at these statistics because it's very unusual. And I think really for the course, we will hope that being very familiar with the statistic can also help you then understand what is going on and then how you can make informed decisions based on this context. Another line is this one. Can someone tell me what you understand? So there is a general line, the general expenditure of which there is ADL, and then of which budget expenditures for previous years, representing 1.5 trillion. It's not a small expenditure, almost maybe 10%. Have you heard of areas? I hope I'm spelling these correctly. Les arriérés. This is very unusual as well. In public financial management, when governments are struggling to pay, sometimes it can also be salaries. Governments cannot pay civil servants, or government cannot pay services and products they have purchased. So if that happens actually, and so for instance, the Ministry of Education has a number of staff. They also have uh, other consumables. And for instance, electricity, that's another example. They consume electricity and the water, but for that specific year, you do not have money to pay it. It goes to the next year as a unpaid debt. And then it is really a really bad practices because it becomes a, a it becomes a burden since you also have expenses for that year, plus expenses for previous year you did not pay. So when you are assessing budget documents, government, of course, government budget documents, and you see that the government is struggling to pay arrears, it really means also it's another indication of financial difficulties. Not only you are paying debts, which is 20%, but also another 10% is going into services and products you have used in previous years, but you haven't paid. Which means actually it creates less available money for that year expenditure. I don't know if it's clear what I'm explaining, but all of these are important aspects to have when you're assessing the government
Yeah, but
finance
it gives
data.
it gives a wrong idea for the يعني when we look at the year, we need to pay something and we didn't pay it, we will leave it to the year after. So it gives a wrong idea for the year before.
Definitely, definitely. Actually, for instance, if we were to see how exactly how much is available for 2021 as real resources, you have to take the 15.7 trillion. You take out the subvention because it's something like we can call not useless, but it's not like actual money you can use. You need to take out also these areas because it's going to pay services we used in the past. And then it's going to also pay debt services. So if you take out these three lines, I think this is let's say let's round up to 1 trillion, 2.5, and then 3. So 5.5 trillion, roughly of resources that are really not useful because they are going uh, to either paying debt or paying previous year's expenses. It's an indication really of difficulties in public financial management. Are there questions on this before moving on to next items? I think I'm trying to see um, in the reader we have recommended readings that can then help you go beyond what we are discussing here. For instance, there is a study conducted by Nesrini. Remind me about the organization that did this study called the Public Financial Mismanagement in Lebanon. It was done by a research institute from Lebanon. Very interesting because it is discussing this aspect we are looking at, including really the real stories behind these figures and of course the corruption cases. And it really goes beyond corruption. It's really I think in some literature it's called state capture, when the public money is going to a limited number of maybe officials or some elite instead of benefiting the majority of the population.
Yes, and I'm putting in the chat. So in the chat, Claude, participants are sharing that they didn't have time to read the suggested reports yet, and I'm putting in the chat as well the link to the reports that Claude just mentioned.
Questions before moving to the next item? So hopefully you get time over the coming days to look at this, and you can use that information as you complete the activities.
No questions.
Okay, good. So let's move to the. I'll share the screen again. This way. Yeah. Okay. So the last unit of module 1 is about the concept of cost of education. So here we would like to spend some time discussing with you going from the whole of government analysis to the education sector. And hopefully, as you can see, we are trying to move from general considerations and concept to education specific, and then from module 1, 2, then to module 3, we really then go to very practical aspect of education financing as you apply that to your daily activities. I will not spend time discussing about
Sorry,
these.
I have a question. Sorry.
Yes, please.
I have a question. When you talk about definition of educational output, which means that it is the impact at the level of the learners, yani at the level of the school, isn't it? Yani the final effect on education, it is at the micro level, at the level of the school, at the level of the classroom, at the level of the learner. But when we design our projects in CRDP and we specify our deliverables, okay, we specify them, for example, as a framework or curriculum for intervention program to enhance the numeracy and literacy at the level of the learners. But we don't mention by how much. You see what I mean? We identify certain gaps and we say that based on these gaps, we're gonna design a certain educational program in order to fill in the gaps at the level of these, at the level of learners. But we don't put the output as a deliverable. Yani, this is concerning our work in CRDP. I don't know if I could transfer my idea. My question here is the definition of educational output is always should be at the level of the learner, at the level of the school.
I think there is no easy answer to that, but I will tend to say yes, because education, the ultimate objective of everything we do for us involved in education, mostly you working for at national level, it is that students go to school and then they learn. It's really very basic indicators. They need first attendance, participation, and then learning, because that's really the objectives of the whole system. Of course, this is for general education. When you move to vocational training, beyond learning, you also need access to job market, l'insertion sur le marché du travail. For higher education, you can have other expected output, such as maybe research and development, and also job market related indicators for higher education graduates. So you can see that you need to be specific. Where if I'm talking about general education, the outcome very simple. Children need to go to school, all of them. So there is a dimension of equity there. As we know that maybe there might be differences, and then children have to learn. So that's the quality of learning. So for me, I'll tend to present things that way. But of course, also we know, I think that is what is reflecting this definition. That's the ideal context or ideal expectations. But in most countries, it is difficult to quantify some output indicators. And that's then why we recommend to use a variety of indicators, which put together then it can give a comprehensive picture of educational performance. So meaning mixing quantitative indicators on attendance, participation, progress from one year to another, and then also learning with children are learning, but also learning on different topics, not only So you can see, I don't know if it was clear, but I was trying to put that into the context. Several education output indicators, which need to be customized depending on the level of education, also the context of the country. Hope that was useful.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Good. So I was saying that I will not spend time on these definitions because you can read this at your pace, and feel free to raise questions later on if you have questions with this one. But we can spend rather some time looking at the indicators that are used to see how education is being financed, and then how the education expenditure is being used for producing the result we spoke about earlier. So typically, this is a recall of what we said at the beginning of this training. In a typical country, education is financed by public financing. Let me get the highlighter or the pen. So education financing, public financing. So and external. External financing can go directly through the government budget, or it can directly provide funding to schools. So these are direct contributions. For instance, a donor directly providing funding to a school, or an NGO that will then go provide support to the schools. The external financing also can go through the budget. So these are budget support or projects that are implemented with the government. And then aside the public financing, you have the private. In a typical setting, you have, of course, families. Households also means families paying for their children school fees and many other expenses related to school attendance. And of course, in some countries, this can represent a huge amount on or burden on families. And it is also one of the reasons we have education issues, because then if families do not have capacity to pay, then it means that either they will not send their children to school, or they will send their children to bad schools because they cannot afford the good schools. And in terms of the sources, it is often you have NGOs and other private entities. So for instance, some country you have companies contributing to education, but that's mostly for vocational training, where when they have training centers or they provide scholarships, etc. But this is really one way of summarizing the sources of funding for education available for funding. The public, meaning the government budget, the donors, and then households and other private entities. And then, of course, out of these actors, you can compute a number of indicators to assess then who is providing the most funding, etc. So typically, if you want to see the share of each source in the total, it just amount, for instance, if you want to see the household, you take the household expenditure, compare it to the total, then you can say that the families are contributing to around 20, 30, or 40% of the education. We don't have statistics for Lebanon, but we heard that given that there is a significant portion of education systems managed by the private education, we can expect that families are paying a lot in terms of education in Lebanon. I don't know if you have any comment on that, but I would like to hear your experience with education expenses by families in your context. Anyone would like to share their feedback on this?
Maybe Warren can tell us about or reflect about this, because he is the
We cannot hear you. Sorry, I think you're speaking from afar.
Maybe Wael can tell us about this because he is the head of the finance office in CRDP. We are educational profile more than knowing indeed specifically how the process is followed.
Thank you.
Claude, excuse me, could you please repeat the question? I was not paying attention. So
the question was, what is your comment or reaction on the household expenditure on education in Lebanon? Since the private sector is a significant actor, one would expect that education families are paying a lot of money for education, which would not be the case, at least for general education. General education should be covered by the public. So what is your experience with that?
Yeah, the biggest percentage of students, and correct me please, colleagues, are in private schools here in Lebanon. So I think ما بعرف around بلكي 70% of the students. And yes, the education here هلا it depends. It's يعني some schools they're يعني the family need to pay less than others. We have different we don't do شو بنقول القسط different خلاص I can't find the word.
Tuition fees?
Yeah, the tuition fees 100% Tanya, thank you. So the tuition fees fluctuate even for the same group of school, private school, let's say. A few of those schools, their tuition will be for $2,000 per student, and the others $6,000 for students. So it fluctuates.
But sorry, what Rania is saying is very important. But what I understood from this diagram is something different. Correct me, please, if I'm wrong. Okay. I understood from this as if there are external funds coming to Lebanon. Okay. And they are going to finance they will come to public, let me say, entities, public financing like ministries or the Ministry for Primary Education. Okay, we don't have Ministry for Primary Education. We have the ministry plus decentralized structures. Okay, and then these funds might also come to primary schools. When you are showing this, maybe I didn't pay attention well. You are talking about both the public and the private sector?
This is a generic figure. It does not apply specific to Lebanon. That's why the reference are not, of course, specific to Lebanon. But it's a one way of representing in very summary way what are the different sources of funding available to education in a typical setting. And of course, what we would like to discuss, how does this apply to Lebanon? And then what is the relative significance of each sources? Because as I said earlier, we expect that the government provides the bulk of the funding to education. That's their job. They should collect taxes and then pay for public services, including education and health. But we also know that in some contexts, you have a lot of money being provided by donors, which can go through the budget. So that means the donor gives the money to the government and then the government implements, or the donor also can provide directly funding to a service provider. In this case, it's a school, through a specific project or through other intermediaries such as NGOs. An example. Then we have also private financing comprised of families and then private companies. It's really a way of in French we call it schématisé, really representing in a very summary way who are the actors for education finance in the country. And I would like to add my question here because it's something that is not visible in the figure, internally generated funds. For instance, the question is whether also you have these in your context. But this is also speaking to some of the questions mentioned on the platform, because as we know, the education sector in Lebanon would like to have more and more resources. So it is useful to understand what are the sources out there, and then how can we tap into these and raising more funding. But of course, behind every of these sources, there are also implications. And my question was that in a country where families are already paying a lot, you cannot expect that you are going to raise more funding from families because they are already contributing a lot. So for equity issues, you cannot expect them to pay more. On the opposite, when possible, um, uh, the contribution by families should be the lowest possible, at least for general education. Uh, that was my comment. I don't know if it's clear now.
Yes, it's clearer. Thank you.
Yeah.
But of course, we have something slightly different in Lebanon from what is presented here. And as I told you, for myself, I'm saying maybe I don't know exactly the exact resources and how are they funneled into the ministry or directly to schools. I don't have the exact information about this.
That's okay because
So this is why I'm saying maybe Mr. Wael can help us to reflect this on Lebanon, how it might be in order to be able to go with you concerning this example. And maybe if we take an example from Lebanon, it's better for us to imagine the case.
Yeah, definitely. I think I'm referring to Nesrine. I think not the practice. One of the group work we have is also going to be having you conduct similar assessment for Lebanon, because it's really useful to understand where education financing is coming from, and also understand what are the alternative sources, so that, for instance, if there are sources that are not used, how can we raise more funding from those sources? So having a comprehensive understanding helps then to see, okay, we are doing budgeting only based on one source, but there are other sources we could tap into to raise more funds.
That's right. And Claude, we have Graziella who had her hand up. So if you'd like to share.
Yeah, please.
Thank you. So I raised my hand. Thank you, Nesrine. So I raised my hand to say that this figure, this illustration, could apply to the public and to the private sector in Lebanon. So actually, of course, Ivan said that it really differs. But in Lebanon, we have, of course, external funding for the primary school. We have all of this applies, but we have something else that in the private sector, we have three types of school. We have the private sector, we have the sponsored private sector. So the government pays or sponsors some private sector. So it's paid double. It pays the private schools for students according to the number of students. يعني I don't know how to say it, but he sponsors, يعني the government sponsors some private schools. And then, and so this is part of the budget that's of the government's budget, plus all the public sector, he has all the public servants are sponsored also to ما بعرف, I don't know how to say it. Ils sont, je peux parler en français?
Oui, bien sûr.
Ok, donc même les agents du secteur public sont payés pour scolariser leurs enfants dans le secteur privé. Donc, il y a là, le gouvernement sponsorise, donc, the private sector is sponsorized from several sources, from the government, through the government. So that's why.
Ouais. Oui. Go ahead first. Sorry, I cut you.
No, it's enough. I said enough things,
Okay.
so I don't know yet. It's something we have to take into consideration while budgeting and and it's important. It's really important how we sponsor the private sector from the government. It's like this, and with that we have debt and we have loans we have to pay, and it's like a vicious cycle. We couldn't get off it.
Definitely. So thank you so much for this comment. The topic related to government subsidies to private schools or private sector is also an important topic. I think we take notes. We could see how we can introduce that into upcoming sessions, because also it can be seen, if not well managed, it can create a lot of unintended consequences. The government should not be subsidizing the public sector. It happens in most countries, but it creates lots of unintended consequences when it's not well managed. I mean, here really my comments are mostly on general education, because as you know, general education in most countries covers children of age of mandatory schooling. And when you're talking about mandatory schooling, we're talking also the responsibility.
Yes, 15 to 16 years old.
Yes. We're talking about the responsibility of the government to provide schooling to everyone. So while we can understand that for higher levels, mostly university, you can have private universities, etc., and everyone is free to go where they want. But for general education, it's really the responsibility of the government to make sure that every child goes to a decent school. So when you have then a huge marketization, I think we can say, of general education, then it creates all of these bad practices where then they are relying on government funding to run the schools, and then at the same time they are charging fees to parents. Of course, we understand the special situation, but at some point there should be reforms addressing this. It cannot continue. I think one good example, actually, we did not include that, but it would be good to for practice to do a similar figure of funding flows for the case of education in Lebanon, making the distinction between public schools and then private school, to see then who is financing what and under which mechanism. We can see how we can reflect that in the upcoming sessions. Sorry, someone want to say something?
Yeah, Claude, I just wanted to add that Yvonne wrote in the chat that we would need to illustrate the public sector's case and the private sector's case separately,
Yes,
as the sources of funding differ and their shares differ. So
different. Definitely, it's a that's actually, if you do both in the one figure, it's going to overlap. Then it will be not clear. So the mechanism for public sector should be separate. So it will be the two figures. So it will really be nice to have that and then discuss that next time. I also want to raise a question. Of course, it's very marginal. The IGF we call internally generated funds. this is a practice in some contexts where schools can raise resources internally. I'm not talking about the school fees. This is rather whether schools have activities that how you call this commercializables. Probably does not apply to primary schools, but for vocational training, sometimes they have workshops where they can produce goods and services and then sell them to the market and make money out of it. Also higher education. Are there any similar practices in Lebanon?
Maybe you could ask your question too in French, Claude, if you'd like.
Yes. So, let me repeat. La question était si on a des cas des écoles qui sont capables de générer des ressources additionnelles internes, hors les frais scolaires. Donc, l'exemple, en fait, ce sont des écoles qui ont des activités génératrices de revenus. Je crois que c'est comme ça qu'on appelle en français. L'exemple que j'ai donné, ce sont les établissements de formation professionnelle qui produisent des services et des produits qu'ils peuvent ensuite vendre et avoir des ressources additionnelles pour
Je
faire
crois
fonctionner
que
les
pour
établissements.
le secteur public, c'est interdit. On ne peut pas le faire. C'est ce
OK.
que je crois. ما بعرف. أسامة
OK.
وائل, can
Yes.
any school, public school or public university or whatever, generate, produce something and sell it and get يعني resources from it? Is
No,
it
it's not
allowed
allowed
for the public
No,
in
sector?
our.
It's not allowed.
It's not allowed in
we should,
our law.
Even for
we should,
CERT as an institution, a public institution, we're not allowed, I think, to do this.
OK. So
we
the
should,
Sorry, I have a question, Rania. When you are, for example, training the private schools, is
ما
it
ببغي
for
الربح.
fee?
لا. They just
no, we
pay
But you
for
should
strictly,
recognize in your.
yeah.
and we should put the money in the
For
central bank in our account, not for and we put these amounts in our budget too. And the Ministry of Finance should know about these amounts. That's for CRDP. But for the public schools,
The same for other institutions. It's the same for other institutions.
Okay. Thank you so much.
One more question here. I have
yes, please.
One more question here. When you are talking about internally generated funds, there are two levels. I'm just asking really because I don't know. For example, sometimes the students, for example, they make some activities in school, especially grade 12 students, in order to fund their graduation ceremony. For example, they might sell like souvenirs or cake sale or whatever. Does this lie under this idea, or it's something which is not legislated? It's something related to a school, but it's not legislated by policies or any internal regulations. So does it lie under this term, internally generated funds, or it's something?
I think it is different because if it's a very special one-off activity, I will not consider it as a recurrent source of funds, because this is when really there is an organization behind that say, as part of our functioning,
Yes,
we
this
want to
belongs to the
be
students, not
Yes.
for the school.
Exactly. So this would not go. So we can say that this is not to be I mean considered for the case of Lebanon. So to summarize this, I think the situation is.
Excusez-moi.
Oui, bien sûr.
But
Allez-y.
I raised my hand just to say that il y a une procédure pour ça. Je sais qu'il y a des établissements qui font cette procédure s'il y a, par exemple, un kermesse ou quoi que ce soit pour générer de l'argent. Mais c'est une culture parce que c'est tellement difficile, les procédures administratives, que les gens arrêtent de le faire. C'est beaucoup plus simple
Okay.
de ne pas le faire, de ne pas se casser la tête. Donc, c'est quand même un moyen pour générer de l'argent. Et c'est quelque chose, donc c'est une culture, moi je pense, et dites-moi, hein, dites-moi ce que vous en pensez. Est-ce que ça serait une culture à diffuser pour
Uh,
vraiment, parce que c'est pas à enlever, c'est quand même peut-être c'est quelque chose qu'il faudrait encourager peut-être.
uh, um, Sorry, I don't know if I should respond in English or French, but what I wanted to say is that actually it really depends on the national context. I understand that there are regulations that forbids these practices, and I assume that there are good reasons why the government of Lebanon decided so. But I know of other contexts where there is a very organized way of doing so. An example actually is that you have schools. Some of them they have really nice buildings, which are not used on weekends. They have big rooms that can accommodate festivities. They also have parking spaces, etc. In some countries, such schools are allowed to use that to raise money. For instance, if you have a school in an urban state setting with a huge parking space, and then maybe lots of empty rooms they can rent on weekends, why not use that to get more money? And if there is an organized way of managing that funds in a very transparent way, I would not be against it. So that's really one way of putting this. There are other contexts where schools, of course, depending on the context, schools, they have canteens. And some schools also, they have a lot of space and the gardens, and then they will grow food. In that case, it's not food to sell on the market, but it's food, it's food they can then use directly for their canteens. But you can see that they will save money because they will have bought that on the private market otherwise. So it depends really how the system organized. But when you have a system that is struggling with getting additional resources, you should not say no to some potential sources of income, as long as you have a, a good management system behind that. That would be my overall comment. What do you think?
No, of course, for me, this Yvonne put in the chat that the private schools do that. So there's a lot of examples in the private sector, but in the public sector, there's some small examples, but it's not generalized, and it could be. That's why for me, I'm raising that question to see if we could what we call uh, generalize this or diffuse this culture in our country, in the public sector, not only in the private sector.
Yeah. I think a typical, I think for me, I'll be in favor of that, of course, but there should be maybe some feasibility studies to see what are the risks and opportunities related to this before having then a national policy on that. But as I said earlier, there are countries and education systems that are really use that as an important source of income, which is then going to complement government funding and other sources. As you know, that in most countries, actually, domestic resources, it just means salaries. Government pays salaries, and then schools do not have a budget for operating expenses, training teachers, running teacher training, etc. And if you can raise additional sources for your schools to run better, that that should not be a problem. But of course, it need to be organized. Otherwise, can create always these unintended practices.
Maybe we want some amendments or modification to the applicable laws and regulations in our country.
Yeah. Because, for instance, countries that have such practices, they put in place a school management committee that then oversees what the resources and then how they can use it. Because you need to decide also how do we use this money? Are we going to use it to improve the school infrastructure? Do we use it for teacher training or etc. Something like that. So there's need to be a committee to decide on how to use this. Sorry, I interrupted you.
In our case, sorry.
Yeah, I just want to say that the teacher training for the public sector is for free. So the teachers
For
can
the public or
attend
the
the
private?
sessions بالبابليك عنا نحن we
yes,
train
okay.
teachers for free.
Yes.
So
At some point, Rania, we tried to see if we can internally generate funds from your bureau. يعني عم نحكي كنا
it's not allowed. It's not allowed. It's not
Yes,
allowed. Legally,
it's
يعني
really
as an
weird.
institution, a public institution, it's not allowed نبغي الربح من وراء service نحن بنقدمه.
No, it's not تبغي الربح يعني it's something just generate some funds to cover our expenditure. يعني هيك we tried to do it. It was really hard.
For example, if you are hosting like a training for private teachers in your training centers, you need, for example, fuel for the generator. You need some stuff for the toilets, etc., etc. So you are just funding your needs. يعني your شو بقولوا لهم هيدول
True
يعني
operational cost to cover this session. This session. I don't take مثلا 100 let's say $500 to cover the operational cost and ask the school to pay $700. The $200 I will keep them for the center, and the center after he can use it or something. This is for the private sector. We can only ask them to pay a fixed amount, and this amount need to be issued by a circular from the president of CERD and it needs to be generalized for all the sessions given to the private sector. We cannot take from a school an amount different from another school and private school or for the public schools, we train them for free.
Okay, thank you so much. This is very interesting to learn, and that we hopefully will be able to also use that for the upcoming sessions, including also on the group works, where we really want to apply these concepts to the very context of Lebanon. We have a couple of slides to cover before the end of the session. If you allow, we can continue, and actually the rest of the sessions are about the key indicators that are used to assess the education financing. I will go through them quickly, and I would like to then, after that, I would like to see whether these are indicators you use on your activities or whether you find them relevant, or then what are the alternative in case you do not use this one, which other ones you apply. Typically, as I said, really indicators just most of the education indicators are percentages because you are comparing two variables. For instance, if you want to, there is something we call intra-sectoral trade-off. When you want to be able to see how much is the government giving to education compared to other sectors like health, agriculture, etc. So a typical way of doing that, you just take the total expenditure for education, and then you compare that with the total public expenditure. And then when observed over several years, you can see whether the government is giving priority to education or not. We'll see, I think we have some figures for Lebanon, if I'm not mistaken. Otherwise, we'll have to look for them because it's good to know what is the situation in Lebanon. For instance, there are international benchmarks which expect the government to spend between 15 and 20% of their budget for education. So if a government is not doing at least, so you can go beyond, but you need at least to spend between 15 and 20% of your total budget on education. So this is really the UNESCO benchmark. And then once, of course, once you look at the education as a whole, then you can also see how the education budget is being allocated to the different subsectors. So that will be, for instance, looking at the primary, secondary, um, and higher education, just to see how much does each of these represent in the total education budget. It also gives an idea then what is the priority between general education, vocational training, and higher education for the government. And again, looking at these figures for 1 year does not give a good assessment of these. You need to look at this over several years, but also it's always important to compare that with other countries. So most of these are really relative indicators. You need to see how other countries are doing. And then the third one is then the comparing recurrent versus capital expenditure. There needs to be a balance between how much government is giving on recurrent functioning of the system and then the investment, because there needs to be a balance between investing in the infrastructure, equipment, but also running the system so that these are salaries, etc. So these are typical indicators. I don't know if you have any question or any reaction. Does this speak to you in a practical way? Or do you see other alternative indicators? I'll be curious to listen to you.
I have a question, please.
Yes.
Could you please put the previous slide? Yes. When the government gives, and when municipalities has part of their budget for education, should we consider it as intra-sector allocation for educational sector? Is it a part of the educational sector, or no? We shouldn't consider it like this.
When a municipality provides funding for education,
they have municipalities have in their budget a part for schools, for public school, for schools, private and public. But the most of all, it's for public schools. So should we consider it as an extra? Okay.
Yeah, definitely subnational entities, generic terms, including municipalities, decentralized, when they have additional funding, they can use to finance education. This is also public because this at the end of it's public money. But of course, you need to be able to know whether it is their own revenues or it's just a transfers coming from the central level going to the decentralized, then to schools, to avoid double counting. because if it is the case, sometimes you have already accounted for it in the total budget. But if it is on income, because some municipalities, they have the capacity to raise resources at their level through local taxes, etc. So they have their own income, then they can use to provide funding to their schools in their municipality. So it's always considered to be a public financing. But if you have data, it is good to separate then the central level financing and then the decentralized financing. It's important to have both if you can.
Thank you so much.
Okay. So yeah, these are really typical statistics. In the reader, you have some Excel data to play with, just to compute. As I said, most of them are just ratios. Just divide one thing by another, then you multiply by 100, and then over time you can really see whether the government give priority to education versus health, or whether government is giving priority to higher education versus general education, etc. These are really the basic indicators to assess education performance. And this is a figure, it's an illustration of what we've been discussing. I don't think we need to spend time on it. It just shows how the government budget is financed. As we said, the government domestic resources are a portion of the GDP, because the government collect taxes on the economic activity, which is also the GDP, and then they use that money for financing the public services. So most of the indicators we discussed are derived from this schematization in a way. Let me know if there are questions. Otherwise, based on this figure, probably what is, but really these are very basic things you're very familiar with. And of course, these are generic. They might apply a bit differently to the context of Lebanon. But typically, additional indicators you might have are the unit costs. Unit costs, they're also called per student expenditure. It's just a way of saying that what is the cost of sending one student at school per the government, per student cost or unit cost, which is very simple actually. You just take the total recurrent for a specific level, for instance, primary, and then you divide by the number of students for that level. And then that case, we can say sending one students to primary school in Lebanon costs 10,000. I'm making up that figure, 10,000 Lebanese pounds. This indicator is also useful then because you can compare that over time, because it gives an indication what is the investment, public investment per student, per child. And then you see that over several years, you can see that is the government investing more or less. As you can see, then there is two factors involved. Of course, what the government is putting in, but also the population. In countries where there is a huge demand of education, like a big demographic growth, regardless of how the government invests, the investment per student will keep being low, because you have what is called demographic pressure. For instance, in many countries in Africa where there are still big population growth, this is the case. Governments and donors will put in more money, but the population is also growing a lot. And then the investment per students remain low, because the gains in investment are also really outpaced by the growth of the population. But I really do not know what is the case for Lebanon. I would like to listen for you whether there is a population pressure on public services. Is this the case or not? I think this is the last slide of this. The next one is on a few questions about the data sources. Any reaction on this?
I think these indicators are related to MEHE more than CRDP.
Definitely, actually,
Because we don't.
That's true. That's true. We really looking mostly.
Yes.
We're talking about from really the MEHE perspective.
Yes,
Who are the ones who deal
CRDP
with
is
that.
a sub-sector from MEHE. We
Okay.
don't work for this, يعني, about this.
Yeah, we don't work on access to education. We work on quality more than access. That's why we
Okay.
don't have those. But if I'm not sure if we have lots of students. لا يعني you asked the question, so I think this is this ratio is big here in Lebanon because the number of students, يعني we don't have a load
I
there
think
on the
1 million.
especially in the public sector, يعني.
Okay. Interesting. For instance, do you have population projections for the next 20, 30 years to give you an idea how many students are going to be attending school and see whether it is going to be a huge increase or relatively low increase? Do you have such data?
I don't think so. ما بعرف. From where can we get it? From which ministry? Those statistics from the ايه
ما بعرف، إدارة الإحصاء المركزي.
Okay, well, it's saying that there is an entity who provides those data, so but we're not
So it'd be good.
familiar, يعني. Yeah, sorry.
It would be good. It would be good to have a look on those because they provide also an indication of because for planners as you, what is going to happen for the next 5, 10 years in terms of the demand. If the population is expected to grow quite a lot, then you can expect that the demand on education services will grow equally. And actually, we wanted to have a quick overview, and of course, we would like you to post also your answers on the platform on these questions, because as you can see here, we only looked at the concepts and the definitions and the indicators, but to be able to apply that in the real context, then you need data. You need to be able to know what are the school age population, how many children are going to school at different grades, public, private, and then what they expect, government expenditure, etc. It's only once you have all those information, you can then be able to compute the different indicators, meaning that actually you need to have a good understanding of where to find these data. I think
Claude, another
yes.
question. These data are affected by the refugees as well, no?
Yes.
Yeah, so
definitely.
with all the crises we're facing here, I'm not sure if we can expect in 10 years the population because the Lebanese are leaving the country and the non-Lebanese are coming and living here, and it's hard to get those expectations for
I understand this. I understand the challenges. We were last year with Nasreen. We in Hala actually. We were working in Jordan, which back then they were hosting a huge amount of refugees from Syria. And of course, it had affected the way they plan because they have more than 1 million. And now I spoke with colleagues from UNESCO Amman. They told me that Syrians are going back to their country now that the situation is improving, which is a good thing for them. And then with implications on then the budgeting and the planning from Jordan perspective. I think you live in a very special region, geopolitical wise, etc. But I think you should be able to reflect that into your planning. You remember last Tuesday we spoke about reflecting uncertainties and crises and unpredictable events in the planning. So this is another example. If you have big movements of populations in and out with implications on your education system, How do you factor that in? That would be an interesting discussion to have. Any final comment on that before we wrap up?
We're going through that in the module 3 or 2, maybe the strategic planning. Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. This is really very introductory. It's really the module 1. Module 2 next week will be similar, but focusing on public financial management. And then module 3, then that's where we start really.
Yes.
And 3, that'll be the week
yes.
after. Yes.
And we should take into consideration the situation, the risk, etc., etc.
Definitely, yes.
Thank you.
So we are done for today. I don't know if Sage, you want to remind Sage on the screen. What are the next steps in terms of completing module 1? We have a number of tasks to be done. And we are really a bit worried. If you want to share this with your colleagues, we have a really low participation and on the platform and during the live session. So we would like to see how best to support you. And because there are things that need to be validated and submitted each week so that we can move from one module to another. Nesrine, do you want to?
Yes, of course. So thank you, Claude. And for the activities of this first module, so there is a quiz that's available on the platform. It is a 10-question quiz, and it's supposed to be sort of very straightforward, not very difficult to fill, but with core concepts from module 1. And then there are also, there is a discussion forum. So you are going to be asked questions, and then we prompt you to respond to the discussion forum. And then after that, the responses of all of your colleagues will appear after you respond. And we highly encourage you to interact with other responses from your colleagues and to sort of respond to those as well. And there is as well a group activity. So the group activity for this week, it comes with a spreadsheet that we have prepared. And so you are going to have sort of access to that as well. And all of the instructions of the group activity are provided on the platform. And there is no submission, there's no required submission for the group activity for the first week. So you can start working on that with your group. We highly recommend you to finish it before the beginning of module 2 because group activities will accumulate. For the quiz and the discussion forum number 1, the deadline for submission is next Monday at 9 p.m. For the group activity, we recommend that you work on it as well before then. But if you are unable to meet with your group, then you can reach out to us and we'll see how we can support you in that respect. Is that all? Claude, did you want to add something, or maybe Sage or Hala also, if you have any comments?
I'll just also mention that each module we have a survey that is meant to be answered right after kind of reading the module reader. And that will just help us feed in questions and some of your kind of individual experiences into the live sessions. Because we're done module 1 now, just a note for module 2 going forward that we have the survey as well.
Yeah. One last comment is that we will be also posting the glossary, and we hope this resource is something that will help you throughout the training to really get familiar with the different terminologies that are used in education finance and public financial management. We'll post it on the platform and share you the link. And also really as you move into the different materials, do not hesitate to reach out to us for support using all different modalities available to us now. So thank you so much. We'll close today's session here, and then we'll reach out to you early Monday based on the maybe earlier than that, based on then what we're going to find out from the survey, whether we do one session or two. I don't know whether we should start that as of next week or we start the new arrangement the week after. But we will also submit these to your feedback. But we understand that probably once a week, early in the week. So Tuesday will be ideal. So we get back to you on that.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, and have a nice weekend ahead.
Yeah.
Au revoir.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day.
Thank you.